So today we're going to discuss mindfulness of feelings, which is the second of the four foundations of mindfulness, and in some ways one of the most important. Coming up. So I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association. That's secularbuddhism.org. If you're new to the channel and interested in helping to promote a wiser and a kinder and a less stress-filled world, both for yourself and for everyone else, consider subscribing to the channel. So in the Buddha's Satipatthana Sutta, or the Sutta on the Foundations of Mindfulness, the second one he discusses is mindfulness of feelings. And at the beginning of the discussion of mindfulness in general, he gives us a definition, which is basically to be diligent and clearly knowing as we're undertaking this kind of practice. It's clearly a diligent practice, it's a practice of effort. And it's something we should undertake, he says, free from desires and discontent with the world. Now, what exactly that means is something that's up for grabs. Now, Analio, who has done a wonderful book on the Satipatthana Sutta, basically doesn't think that this means that we have to be completely free of the five hindrances, which are hindrances to meditation, because if we had to be that way, we would almost never be doing mindfulness meditation. But rather, that it means that we have to be undertaking this without a sort of a sense of liking and disliking, or at least leaving our liking and disliking to one side as we undertake this practice. And in fact, that's particularly important with mindfulness of feelings, because feelings, this is a sort of a technical term, a translation of a Pali term. It's a technical term. It doesn't mean emotional feelings. I mean, we tend to think, oh, feelings means emotions. In this context, it doesn't. What it means are, we might say, the bare affective qualities of experience. That is an experience pleasant? Is it neutral? Or is it unpleasant? That is what we mean when we're mindful of feelings. We're trying to be mindful of pleasant feelings when they arise, neutral feelings when they arise, and unpleasant feelings when they arise. And of course, we'll notice this throughout our daily life. As we walk around through daily life, we'll notice we can even name them to ourselves or note them to ourselves. A certain pleasant feeling will arise, then we'll have neutral feelings for a while, then a negative feeling, an unpleasant feeling. And this can be visual, things that look pretty or look ugly, things that sound nice or sound ugly, things that taste nice or taste bad, and so on, smells that are good or bad. And then also we should remember that this includes mental feelings, because the mind for the Buddha is one of the actually 6 sense doors. So we can include in that pleasant thoughts and unpleasant thoughts, or neutral thoughts. And this may sound like a sort of a strange thing to pay attention to as one of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We may think, why are we spending time on pleasant and unpleasant feelings? Who cares? The reason is actually very, very important, because feelings in particular holds a critical place in the chain of dependent origination. And I did a talk on dependent origination a while back, which I can put up a link here on the screen. It occurs between contact and craving or aversion. So we have contact with, that is to say, contact with parts of the world. Our eyes come into contact with visual sensations, visual stimuli, our ears, our fingers, our toes, our body. And also, in the Buddha's understanding, the mind comes into sort of contact with ideas or concepts or views. And then feelings arise from that. That is, these are automatically seen as either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And from that arise our desires, our discontents, our cravings, our rejection. And basically that's because pleasant feelings cause us to crave more. If we see something very nice or very pretty, we want it. We want to possess it. We want to own it. Or we want to at least keep it with us. We don't want it to go away. The same thing with pleasant sounds or pleasant touches, pleasant ideas, pleasant thoughts. We want to keep them around. And we're aversive towards unpleasant ones. So if we see something that's unpleasant, we sort of want it to go away. If we hear something unpleasant, we want it to stop. I'm sure we're familiar with this if we've ever sat meditation in groups or even alone. If an unpleasant sound arises, we really have an aversive reaction to that, and we want it to go away. And interestingly, also on the Buddha's view, neutral feelings tend to cause ignorance to arise, because we tend to sort of relax into a state of, we might say, sort of bored indifference, and as a result are not as willing to actually investigate and get to know these things. So feelings occur in this chain of dependent origination between contact and craving. The interesting thing is we can't do much about contact, except, let's say, to remove ourselves from certain situations. But contact just happens willy-nilly as the world impinges upon us. There's nothing we can do about feelings per se either. Positive, negative, neutral feelings just arise naturally within us. But there is something that we can do about craving or about aversion. That is, if we can come to our experience with mindful attention and put a space between the arising of these feelings, then perhaps we can undo ourselves from the natural tendency to crave what is pleasant or to be aversive towards what is unpleasant. That, in a sense, is the focus of practice. In particular, as we come to see the pleasant and the unpleasant, and the neutral, but particularly the pleasant and the unpleasant, as imperfect, as constantly in change, changing, then we become less identified with the pleasant, and we become less identified against the unpleasant, because our normal tendency is to identify ourselves with what we find pleasant and good in the world, and to identify ourselves in contrast to what we find unpleasant and painful in the world. And if we see these as all states of influx, states in constant change, states that we don't expect to be either perfect or completely imperfect, then we relax around the tendency to identify with them, and we in fact can stop that tendency to cling and to identify and to crave. And that in essence is the focus of practice in general for Buddhist practice. Now the other point here is in this section of the Satipatthana Sutta is that the Buddha says we should be aware of worldly and unworldly, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings. That is to say, he makes a distinction between worldly and unworldly, and makes, really, there's 6 kinds of feelings here, not just 3. And that's really something of a surprise, because I think very few people within the contemporary mindfulness community really pay much attention, at least in my experience, to the unworldly, pleasant and unpleasant feelings. We'll leave the neutral ones aside, because while there are interpretations of them, I think they're less important. The pleasant and the unpleasant are particularly important, however. So what are these unworldly feelings? Well, they're related to renunciation and non-identification with the world, basically. And they should all be seen as, in a sense, intellectual or cognitive kinds of states rather than bodily states. They're states of wisdom, of understanding, if you like. So, for example, if we begin to see that the world is changing and imperfect, we may decide, let's say, to renounce certain aspects of it as not ours. We may decide we don't need that second helping of whatever it is on the table. We may feel we don't need to buy this thing in the store. And in that sense, we're sort of renouncing little parts of the world as things we don't need. And as we do that, we may feel a sense of pleasure, a sense of freedom, a sense of lightness, because we aren't, attaching ourselves to parts of the world as me or mine or myself. And that pleasant kind of free feeling that we have when we do this is this kind of, it is a pleasant state, but it's an unworldly pleasant state. It's not involved with sense pleasures. It's not involved with the pleasure of particular concepts or ideas or views per se, but it's just an awareness of our own freedom in a sense. And similarly, if we find ourselves becoming entangled in things in the world, find ourselves succumbing to desires that really are not to our benefit, or at least not to our long-term benefit, that can give us a sense of unpleasantness, a feeling of sadness or whatever, a feeling of, let's say, a kind of feeling of aversion. And that is an unworldly, unpleasant state. In other words, it's a state that's unworldly. It's not about the world per se. It's not about things in the world. It's about our reactions to them. And if our reactions are not skillful, then this kind of unworldly, unpleasant state can arise. So it's by paying attention, in particular, to the unworldly, pleasant and unpleasant states, that we can sort of get a sense of our temperature, as it were, our progress along the path. I mean, is our progress along the path good? Then we should begin to feel more of these unworldly pleasant states, these pleasant states around renunciation or around non-identification. If, on the other hand, we're having trouble, which all of us are from time to time, and some of us more time than others, we may feel senses of unease, of unworldly, unpleasant states, because we feel ourselves getting too caught up in things that we know aren't really to our benefit. So basically, these unworldly, pleasant states arise as we become wiser, as we become aware of the impermanence of the world, aware of the unsatisfactory nature of reality, aware of the passing away of things and the cessation of things, aware that nothing persists forever. And of course, having given us this story, the Buddha then gives us the refrain, which is repeated throughout this text, the Satipatthana Sutta. And so the idea is we're supposed to be aware of these feelings internally in us. We're supposed to be aware of them externally. Now that may mean in other people or in ourselves from the third person. So we see the way these things interact in the world. We're supposed to be aware of them arising and passing so that we see them as impermanent. That's very, very critical to arrive at insight, to arrive at the kind of insight that leads towards awakening, to understand that positive and negative feelings or pleasant and unpleasant feelings are not permanent, they're impermanent, they pass. And we're supposed to be aware of these things without identification, without clinging. And if we're able to get ourselves to a place like that, we're really well along the path. And so as a result, in many ways, the awareness, this kind of mindfulness of feelings, is indeed the most important, or one of the most important parts of mindfulness meditation, and one that really should not be lost or sort of pushed under the rug or forgotten when we're doing this kind of meditation practice. Now, I'd be interested to know, do you guys do mindfulness of feelings practice? Do you normally become aware of these things in your practice? Do your teachers or other people around you guide you to think about these things while you're doing either formal meditation or just the meditation of daily life? Because obviously these things are not only to be done on the cushion or in formal practice, but throughout life. So I hope that this has been useful. Thanks again to all of you for your kind comments and questions. I look forward to some new ones on this video, and we will catch you on the next one. So thanks a lot, and bye-bye.